When Luigi's Mansion debuted on the GameCube in 2001, it certainly was not what most gamers expected from the flagship launch title of a new Nintendo console. After all, the N64 launched just 5 years earlier with the legendary Mario 64, a genre-defining jump into 3D platforming. Instead of following up with more running, leaping, and star collecting across rainbows and sunny skies, Nintendo committed to the exact opposite for the GameCube's debut. Luigi's Mansion delivered a literally dark, slow-moving new sub-franchise without a single jump to be found that would later go on to become Luigi's own series of games. Each Luigi's Mansion game is an interesting experience of its own, but it's just as intriguing to compare the titles to one another. You see, the Luigi's Mansion games really are quite different from each other when you break it down, especially the first game, and I think it's something worth exploring. So in this video, let's examine which game in the series is surprisingly the best, the unique reasons behind that, and investigate why these games are actually so different from one another. As always, please remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons for more retro and current gaming analysis, and let's dive in. Now for this video, we're going to focus primarily on the home console releases of Luigi's Mansion 1, 2, and 3, though I'll reference the 3DS releases a bit where it makes sense. And no, we won't be talking about the Luigi's Mansion arcade game. Look it up, yes, it's a real thing. The series is interesting in the sense that there are only 3 core games that were released many years apart. Luigi's Mansion 2 was released a full 12 years after the original on the 3DS, and was originally subtitled Dark Moon in the US. Luigi's Mansion 3 followed 6 years later on the Switch in 2019. I recently acquired Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, a 2024 Switch port of Dark Moon, and given that it's almost Halloween, I thought what better time to revisit the franchise. Well, after completing Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, the experience felt quite a bit different than what I remembered from the 3DS game and the series as a whole. So I decided to revisit the other titles for comparison. However, after the dust settled on the old mansion floors again, interestingly, the first Luigi's Mansion for the GameCube ended up my favorite even in 2024. I think Luigi's Mansion 1 is more unique and enjoyable than 2 and 3, despite some quirky old flaws. This might be a controversial opinion, so I'm curious for all of your thoughts on which you think is best and why. I haven't seen a lot of discussion around this. The most noticeable difference between the first game and the latter two is that it's the only one in the series that feels semi-spooky, or at least Nintendo's harmless take on horror. In many ways, it feels like a Resident Evil game put through a Mario filter. I mean, if you just look at the imagery here, this is unlike anything you'd see in another Nintendo game, including the other Luigi's Mansion games. The mansion is literally very dark and requires a flashlight to navigate, a neat effect in 2001. There's creepy portraits staring and shaking, dark wells with people being held prisoner, child and crying baby ghosts, and psychedelic boss fights. The textures have sort of a smeary, dingy appearance, and there's even skull imagery in spots. This sharply contrasts the sequels, which appear almost silly and colorful in comparison. The latter two games have brighter, more vivid environments with better visibility. If we just contrast some of the levels here, it's literally night and day. Luigi's Mansion 1 is also the only one of the 3 games where the entire game takes place in, well, a haunted mansion. I like this setup even if it limits the scope and length of the game because it feels like you're actually going around extracting all the ghosts from a haunted house. You're turning on the lights one room at a time and you're figuring out all of the secrets and passages of a creepy mansion. There's a real sense of place and defined structure. Luigi's Mansion 2, on the other hand, takes place across 5 or 6 different locations, some of which are definitely not mansions and not really spooky even by Nintendo standards. I actually really liked the environments of Luigi's Mansion 2 for what they are, and I think they are designed well, but the frequent location changes prevent that sense of digging deep into one location. Luigi's Mansion 3 is sort of a combination of the two. It does all take place in one haunted hotel, but every floor is a very different type of environment, each of which may or may not make sense for a hotel. I appreciate the variety here, and I think Luigi's Mansion 3 has some of the best looking environments on Switch, but I wish the latter two games struck more of a balance between environment variety and the original haunted house. The same can be said for the ghosts themselves. They're the most quote-unquote spooky or at least moody in the original game. Although Luigi's Mansion 1 does have plenty of what I would call generic ghosts, it also has many more humanoid ghosts that are a little bit eerie. There's grandmas knitting yarn, or butlers carrying candles, bros working out, babies in cribs, piano players, and so on, all rendered with effective translucent glows on the ancient GameCube. Humanoid ghosts create a more creepy vibe, and a lot of them are just going about their ghostly business until you interfere. Luigi's Mansion 2, on the other hand, has almost entirely more generic-looking ghosts, and they're my least favorite roster in the series. This part of the game feels uninspired. Luigi's Mansion 3 does bring back more specific humanoid ghosts, such as another pianist for an awesome boss fight, even if the tone of these encounters is still a bit different. Luigi's Mansion 1 also has very minimalistic audio. There's often long moments of near silence, occasional building bass strokes, and yes, sometimes music where it makes sense. This helps to build the mood and eeriness of the mansion. Luigi's Mansion 2 and 3, on the other hand, generally have more extensive soundtracks. There's often full-blown music playing during the entire level, which I think hurts the mood a little bit. It creates more of an adventure game feeling than anything close to creepy. This idea of minimalistic mood extends to the first game as a whole. It's a very simple but focused and intriguing experience with a strong focus on continuous gameplay. Now, Luigi's Mansion 2, on the other hand, switched to sort of a strange mission structure. Each location is split into about 5 10 to 20 minute missions and a boss battle. I would imagine that this was originally done to make the game a better fit for the portable nature of the 3DS, but in practice it doesn't make a lot of sense. These missions are sometimes fairly long and involved, far too nuanced for a quick burst of gameplay, but the game also doesn't really have a checkpoint system. If you die at any point, you have to start the entire mission over again. I actually found this to be super aggravating during my recent playthrough. There's a few annoying sub-boss encounters toward the end of missions that can potentially kill you, and then you have to start the entire mission over again. It's a surprisingly harsh system for a slower-paced, plotting game, where it's tedious to repeat the entire level you just carefully finished. The flow of the game is also constantly interrupted by phone calls from Professor Gadd and numerous cutscenes, especially in the first few hours, so the gameplay just doesn't have the same continuous flow of the first one. So personally, I'd rank Luigi's Mansion 2 in third place, and I think most people would probably agree with this, though it certainly does have some great elements going for it. The combat feels like a decent balance between the simplicity of 1 and the more action-y feel of 3, and I think the environments are very appealing in the HD remaster and have a little more depth than those in 3, which provide tons of smaller levels. Luigi controls well and has responsive animations, and the levels here do feel just barely big enough that you must learn their structure and think a little bit about how things are connected. However, the mission structure just tanks the pacing in a non-handheld environment when combined with the constant interruptions early on. Luigi's Mansion 3 abandons the mission structure on paper, but in practice it plays out similar. Each floor of the hotel is essentially a mission with a set of objectives, and you only revisit the other floors for some gameplay padding and backtracking. The saving and checkpoints are at least much more reasonable than in 2, though. However, this does highlight one of the other core ways 2 and 3 are much different than 1. For the most part, the main mission of Luigi's Mansion 1 is to eliminate all the ghosts that stand in your way to rescuing Mario and cleansing the mansion. You might say the ghosts are the focus, and they're framed that way as you progress. Luigi's Mansion 2 and 3, on the other hand, have endless objectives for Luigi beyond capturing ghosts. He's restarting giant clocks, investigating giant trees, helping movie directors film action sequences, fixing up boilers and waterworks, escorting Toads to safety, and dozens of other tasks, some of which can even feel like small action sequences or set pieces. I certainly don't mind having all these additional objectives for Luigi, but I think the simple, focused structure of the first game is sort of timeless. Now, I think many fans of the series would probably say that Luigi's Mansion 3 is the best entry, and I can understand where they're coming from. I would rank this the second best thanks to gorgeous and varied level design, satisfying combat and boss fights, and the most depth in its systems. However, there's a few things about this game that I think hold it back from greatness. For one, the controls are super annoying. You can't change the Y-axis settings of your vacuum aiming, and by default it's not inverted, which makes certain gameplay segments very awkward or annoying. You also can't manually sprint. You have to let Luigi gradually accelerate on his own. This is frustrating because the environments are small, and by the time Luigi really gets going, you just have to stop again. There are pacing issues as well. The beginning takes a long while to really get going. The main menu system is based on the Virtual Boy as a gag, but is honestly a major eyesore that I can't believe they've ended up going with. Also, even though I enjoy the creative environments, I think this game feels the least like a haunted house or spooky locale, and I wish the overall hotel felt a little more interconnected. Now, to be fair, Luigi's Mansion 1 is also by no means perfect. The most common complaint about this game is its length. Your first time through, you're probably looking at 5 to 7 hours, and about half of that on subsequent playthroughs. Short games don't bother me nearly as much as they seem to bother a lot of other people though, so I'm not that offended by it, and I think if this game was too much longer, the single mansion environment would start to grow old or need a little more variety. I also think the menus and UI of this game have aged poorly, and chasing down all of the boos can be a little tedious. I wish there were more outdoor environments as well around the mansion grounds, since the few that are here have strong atmosphere. However, the first game has other unique characteristics for it that the other two don't. I like the simplicity of the combat. Each fight feels like a mad tackle trying to only use suction to contain the ghosts, since you don't have other zapping or smashing abilities like in the later games. In 2024, this game is also just peak nostalgia. The audio and visuals are just so GameCube, I don't know how else to describe it. The environments hold up as moody and fairly detailed despite their age, and the gameplay animations are honestly kind of amazing for a 2001 launch title. This was a huge leap over the N64 in terms of detail and environmental interaction. You can still interact with almost every single object in these areas, just like 2 and 3, despite this being released over a decade earlier. Even some modern games don't allow for this level of interactivity. The movement also just has this chunky yet responsive feeling of many GameCube games that I really like. And as a side note, I also really hope we receive a light remaster or port of Luigi's Mansion 1 on Switch or Switch 2, so we have the whole trilogy updated. This work was partially completed for the 3DS port, so I'm hoping they also just give us a remaster of 1 like they did with 2. So what do you think? Which is your favorite game in the series and why? What do you think of the first game when compared to the other two? Leave a comment and let's discuss.